B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, April 18th, 2018. Yeah, 4-18-18 if you like those kind of number lineups. Last week I told you that I was not optimistic that Democrats in the Senate would unite to block the confirmation of Mike Pompeo, who's being shuffled from CIA director to Trump's new Secretary of State. And we've learned in the last 24 hours that Pompeo was dispatched on a secret mission by the Donald. And while we were busy over Easter weekend, Pompeo flew to North Korea, and he visited with Little Kim. And according to Pompeo and Trump, the talks went well, and things are proceeding in terms of the negotiations between North and South Korea and the prospect of a Trump-Kim summit, now talked about for early June. And what's fascinating to me is it appears I was wrong, because about a week ago, my sense of the way Democrats were questioning Mike Pompeo at his first confirmation hearing suggested that they were not going to fight to block him. But with a little courage coming from Rand Paul, the wily Republican from Kentucky, Democrats on the committee appear to be lining up against the Pompeo nomination, all but Chris Coons of Delaware, who I watched kissing ass with Pompeo in the hearing last week. All of the Democrats, except for Coons, have said they're going to vote against Pompeo. Jeff Flake, the Republican from Arizona, who has distanced himself, been critical of Trump, and he is not running for re-election, so he's a lame duck who's free to do what he wants. This could, in fact, lead to the denial of confirmation of Pompeo. And this could be interesting because he might wind up staying as CIA director and preventing the promotion of Gina Haspel, the torturer, to run the CIA. And that's something that Democrats appear to be willing to try to block as well. So I'm mildly optimistic about this, and I owe Rachel Maddow a bit of an apology. I slammed her for her reading that Democrats might unite to block Pompeo. She said that about a week ago, and I didn't find that accurate. So these are the kinds of things I love to be wrong about. And I would just be delighted to see the first Trump nomination to fall in a Senate confirmation proceeding. So Pompeo's trip to North Korea was kept on the down low. This is one of the few things that didn't leak from the Trump White House until they wanted it to be public. Congratulations, guys. So what is interesting is that Trump feels that in dealing with Kim Jong Un, he wants to send a thug. He wants to send a guy who's been running the spy shop and figures that that'll be the most intimidating figure who can meet with the leader of North Korea. So it does seem that there is progress being made. And while I'm one of those people who has been cringing at the way Trump tweeted insults at Kim, kind of dared him to launch a missile in our direction, I have to say that things are shaping up here in a way that would show that Trump has had a breakthrough that other presidents, other administrations have not achieved. And I won't take that away from him. I really loathe this guy in just about every manner. But it doesn't cloud what I think is my objectivity. That if he can pull something like this off, we will all be better off for it. So there isn't a date, there isn't a location yet. They're still jockeying about those issues. And yesterday, Trump, I felt, was channeling John Bolton when he said, well, looks like we can have a meeting, could be a good meeting, maybe not a good meeting, maybe there won't be a meeting at all. And Trump loves to dish out that kind of uncertainty. He believes that he's throwing his adversaries off balance or onto their heels. Maybe sometimes that is true, but largely I think it just seems like buffoonery. So some officials have expressed concern about the CIA's taking the lead in orchestrating a leader-to-leader meeting, work that would normally be the province of the State Department. But they fired Rexon Tillerson. He never filled many second-level posts at state, and so there's really nobody home there, and that appears to be by design. Meanwhile, North and South Korea, and I want to be fair that there is consultation with the United States. This is not going on in a separate kind of dyad, if you will. But South Korea says it's been in talks with American and North Korean officials about negotiating a peace treaty to formally end the Korean War. Now, the Korean War even predates me. I was born in '53 as the war was winding down, but it led to a kind of truce that has never been converted into lasting peace. There is no treaty between North and South Korea or the American and Chinese people who, were parties to that conflict. And so this could be a very significant shift. And if North and South Korea can reach agreement, and if the U.S. and China will ratify that, it would become a treaty, and that would require the U.S. to formally recognize North Korea. Now, a year ago, these seemed to be impossible goals or steps. And now, it seems that they could occur. But, of course, both Trump and Kim Jong Un are highly unpredictable. And we're going to see if other forces weigh in. For example, I argued a year ago that when Trump tried to use trade as leverage on China to get them to use their influence on North Korea, I described that as a serious mistake. And here is some validation for that point of view. China is very upset because of the tariff threats that Trump has made. And while they are making a few moves about opening up, they're going to allow foreigners to own companies in China. They're talking about reducing tariffs on American automotive imports. But China is still very angry. And there's a whole lot of work to be done on that. And a North Korea expert at the Beijing-based Renmin University said if the two countries can't settle the trade issues, that will have a significant impact on China's attitude toward helping the United States on North Korea. And this is where Trump doesn't quite recognize the principle of the two-way street. He views everything so myopically, and he figures that everybody else has the same myopic perspective. But if we can threaten China with trade sanctions and trade penalties in an effort to get them to do something unrelated, connected to North Korea, well, they can do that to us too. And that's what Trump really doesn't seem to get. Now, there is the prospect here, I want to note, that North and South Korea could reach essential agreements, making Trump largely irrelevant in this process. He may just show up for a signing ceremony or, some other discussion of issues that are all, pretty far along in terms of being settled by the Koreans themselves. We'll continue to monitor that. There's a big feud breaking out between Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador for Trump, and the White House. On Sunday, Nikki Haley appeared on Face the Nation, and she recited talking points that had been issued to her from the White House on Saturday night. And those talking points included a threat of new sanctions against Russia for the alleged chemical weapons event that Syria is blamed for. That's how things work in the world today. So Nikki Haley recited the talking points. Trump blew up. He had somebody call her and ask her to issue a correction. She did not. So the White House essentially undercut her statement on Monday by saying, nah, not now. No new sanctions on Russia. And then Larry Kudlow, who likes to see himself on TV, and this is going to be a problem because Trump doesn't like other people who get more FaceTime on TV than he does. So Kudlow told some reporters that, well, she got ahead of the curve, she's done a great job, she's very effective, but there might have been some momentary confusion about that. Now, what the hell is Larry Kudlow, an economic advisor, sticking his nose into foreign policy disputes between the White House and the UN ambassador? So Haley retorted, with all due respect, I don't get confused. Kudlow hit the apology button. Oh, she certainly was not confused. I was wrong to say that, totally wrong. As it turns out, she was basically following what she thought was policy. The policy was changed. She wasn't told about it, so she was in a box. Well, this is what happened to Susan Rice after Benghazi. She was required to go on the Sunday morning shows and recite those talking points. And so I have a little empathy for Nikki Haley in this case. But the New York Times suggests that the disconnect is a deeper strain between Trump and Haley. Haley has been the most hawkish voice on Russia, and, of course, Trump, he doesn't like that. And it's all very curious about the way he relates to Russia. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see. The other little issue that popped up was that Nikki Haley has a deputy named John Lerner, and last week Mike Pence, the vice president, said that Lerner is going to do double duty and serve as his national security advisor, and Trump put the kibosh on that. Hell, I don't know why. I saw this biased report in Vice News today. Wanted to share it with you. The headline reads, Russia keeps changing its story on the chemical attack in Syria. The opening lines, Moscow's narrative around the recent chemical weapons attack in Duma took another twist Tuesday, with a Russian military figure claiming troops had found a chemical weapons laboratory and stockpile in the town, but that it belonged to an Islamist rebel group. Now note that this is treated as a lie. It's not journalism where you say, well, this is what one side says and this is what the other side says. Everything about that paragraph suggests that what Moscow is saying is simply not true. Because, hey, videos, hey, pictures, hey, the white helmets. Alexander Rodionov from the Russian military's Chemical Weapons Protection Unit said his team had found chlorine and components for producing mustard gas in a laboratory of the rebels in the town of Duma. Now, I don't know if this is true, but it's certainly worthy of investigation. It's also notable that the investigators from the OPCW still apparently have not been permitted to get to the actual scene in Duma, and I can't explain that. But this kind of biased reporting is something that we're seeing more and more today. And it is intended to pander to an audience that is trained to be loathing Russia. And particularly in this case in Syria, there's no indication that if there was a chemical event in Duma, that Russia had anything to do with it whatsoever. So, once again, I believe that Robert Fisk's reporting, where the doctor at the clinic in Duma said, oh yeah, a lot of people came in because there was this big dust storm, and then some white helmet guy screamed gas, and it created this hysteria, a panic. You haven't seen that reported in the New York Times or on a major American television network. And I'm going to link to a very interesting propaganda video produced by the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. And it's fascinating to see. Somebody posted it on Facebook. I've got the link, and I'll put it in the show file for the podcast. Take a look. Bashar al-Assad is shown driving a little Honda by himself. There are 2 video cameras in the car, and we don't see those operators, but we don't see security guards or anybody else. And he drives out of Damascus toward Ghouta. And all the way he's describing the scene and where the rebels have been pushed out. He doesn't use the term terrorist, which is often part of his nomenclature. And while I have no sympathy for Bashar al-Assad, I think he is a creepy guy, and a dastardly dictator, it really humanizes him. And if you look at it from the perspective of a Syrian who supports Assad, it is a brilliant piece of everyman. Meanwhile, Israel has indicated that further military action against Iranian forces in Syria could happen. Israeli media ran satellite images and a map showing what it called an Iranian air force using civilian planes. What is that, Cessnas? To transport weapons in Syria, and they've signaled the sites could be targeted amid growing tensions with Tehran. But in Israel, it's all about the 70th anniversary celebration of the founding of the Jewish state. Of course, this is also the bloody anniversary of the Nakba. Now, we're dealing with the Hebrew calendar here, so the actual Gregorian calendar date for the founding of Israel is May 14th, 1948. And the New York Times reports lots of rancor and bickering around who gets the most prominent role in the celebration. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been jockeying to get more face time than a guy named Edelstein. And in a brokered deal, Bibi gets 500 words, Edelstein gets 700. So, on one hand, it's hard to find humor in the 70-year oppression of the Palestinians in favor of the Israelis. And I support the right of Israel to exist, but not as a brutal oppressor of the people who were displaced. And so Israel can have its little party. Netanyahu can get his prominent face time, but it doesn't change anything. Bernie Sanders made his second annual appearance at J Street yesterday. There's a great report on it by Zaid Jilani in The Intercept today. And while Sanders is hardly going to be seen as a flaming pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel advocate, he is offering some strong comments that really, I appreciate, because in the 2016 campaign, he wouldn't talk about foreign policy. It was Hillary's biggest weakness. And he just kept droning on about, college tuition and breaking up the banks were the issues. But he avoided foreign policy almost exclusively. And J Street is a group I know a little about. I've interviewed Jeremy Ben-Ami and another top official. J Street is a moderate version of AIPAC. It is still a Zionist organization, but it is more liberal than AIPAC, and it deserves to be noticed as different. But Bernie Sanders really gave a powerful speech. Let me grab some quotes for you here. He said, "There's much blame to go around for the horrific conditions in Gaza. Hamas, due to its ongoing repression, corruption, and insistence on pursuing a violent struggle against Israel, bears significant responsibility for the deteriorating situation. Israel is to blame as well." Now, let me pause here. These are not radical words, but they are so unusual in the context of the lockdown American political class that dares not utter any word criticizing Israel. Let me say this again. Quoting Bernie Sanders, Israel is to blame as well. While Israel withdrew its forces from within Gaza in 2005, its continuing control of Gaza's air, sea, northern, southern, and eastern borders have made the humanitarian crisis there even worse. Another quote from Sanders, "I understand that the Netanyahu government is trying to make all this about Hamas in order to delegitimize any opposition to the blockade and the occupation." An American senator talks about blockade and occupation. And he goes on. "The presence of Hamas members among a crowd of tens of thousands does not justify the violence that we saw. And frankly, it is amazing to me that anyone would find that point of view controversial." He didn't stop there. More settlements will not bring peace. Demolishing Palestinians' homes and villages will not bring peace. Last year, as some of you know, I wrote a letter to Netanyahu along with 9 of my Senate colleagues protesting the deeply inhumane policy of demolishing Palestinian villages. What I say to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the other multi-billionaire leaders in the region: stop just talking about the poverty and misery in Gaza and do something about it. Now, Sanders is still on record opposing BDS, but these are important steps forward. That a Democrat who's considered a contender for president in 2020 is willing to make these strong statements. That's an important signal. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I'm inviting new people to subscribe in honor of my 65th birthday. It's this Saturday, April 21st. So come on over to peterbcollins.com. There's a menu tab no matter what device or browser you use. You click on that, then choose Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. You can choose $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. If you don't like PayPal, you can conduct this by mail. My P.O. Box is Box 150660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, zip code 94915. My thanks today to Stuart Russell, Andrew Rush, Mark Brodsky, and Brian Massey. They are all monthly contributors to the Peter B. Collins Podcast. And here's a man who's never contributed a dime to the podcast, but contributed a lot of great information over the years, my colleague Gareth Porter. And writing at Consortium News today, he offers a very credible alternative explanation. In the Skripal case, the double agent, the Russian spy, who we were told was poisoned with a nerve agent in March in Salisbury, England. I've linked to Gareth's story. I encourage you to read it, because what he lays out is the origin of various kinds of Russian-made nerve agents and how some of them were sold on the black market to the Russian mob, and that this occurred 20 to 25 years ago, and that if it was Novichok or a similar nerve agent, that it would have been largely diluted over time, and it could produce effects without killing the people who were exposed to it. And so Gareth Porter is a great methodical reporter who digs in and asks questions, evaluates the claims, and compares it to the evidence. And I think you'll find this very compelling. And even if you don't conclude that this is the likely scenario, what it does show is that the claim by British Prime Minister Theresa May that this could only have been done by Russia, by the Russian state, and by Putin, it's not true. And if that's not true, we have to question the underlying claims and the lack of public evidence about the whole case. Well, you know, Trump can't always keep straight what he tweeted last time, what he tweeted before. And today, in his latest salvo against former FBI Director Too Tall Jim Comey, he tweeted, "Slippery James Comey, the worst FBI director in history, was not fired because of the phony Russia investigation, where, by the way, there was no collusion except by the Dems." Now, of course, this contradicts what, he said when he contradicted Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein, who wrote the memo about why Comey had to be fired for his handling of the Hillary Clinton email case. So Trump has trouble keeping those stories straight. A great piece at The Intercept by Peter Moss today takes a look at the chapters in Jim Comey's book that aren't about Trump and the recent events. And it is a stunning indictment of a man who is either indifferent or oblivious to the impact of the law enforcement agency that he used to run and the larger criminal justice system that the FBI sits at the top of. And what Moss shows is that, for example, in writing about racial injustice, Comey describes the killings of Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, and Freddie Gray as tragic deaths. But he turns the killings around, lamenting that they dominated perceptions of the police. They swamped and overshadowed millions of positive professional encounters between citizens and police officers. And extraordinary anger was building toward all uniformed law enforcement. Yes, Comey really went there, blaming the victims of police abuse for making people upset that police were abusing them. Let me repeat that. This is a really well-written sentence. Yes, Comey really went there, blaming the victims of police abuse for making people upset that police were abusing them. And so what we see is that Comey was really captive to the whole mentality that the FBI is this saintly organization that's there to defend us from bad influences and evildoers. And he can't see the extreme impacts of the work that he did, particularly on people and communities of color. Mitch McConnell, Senate leader, Republican, he's saying that he will not permit a vote on a bill that would try to protect Robert Mueller from being fired as special counsel. He said he doesn't think it's necessary because he doesn't think Trump will fire Mueller. And quote, I don't think he should fire Mueller. I don't think he's going to, so this is a piece of legislation that's not necessary in my judgment. I'm the one who decides what we take to the floor. That's my responsibility. We will not be having this on the floor of the Senate. Meanwhile, McConnell is trying to engineer the defeat of a Republican candidate for the Senate in neighboring West Virginia. And he's coal baron Don Blankenship. So McConnell's friends have a super PAC, the Mountain Families PAC, that is running ads in West Virginia opposing Blankenship. And the blowback of this is that, the pro-coal, pro-Trump Tea Party types who believe that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are these big Republican sellouts who've got to be thrown under the bus so that the Freedom Caucus and the far right wing can dominate. Those are the forces at play here. After a federal judge ordered Michael Cohen's lawyers to reveal that Sean Hannity has been some kind of a client of Cohen's, we've learned more about the cozy relationship between the Fox News anchor and his buddy, Donnie Trump. Apparently, they talk frequently, often 2 or 3 times a week, late at night after Hannity finishes his show, and the Trump finds him a real loyalist. He's described as somebody who doesn't have to be obsequious to Trump, but what else does Hannity know? And Fox said, amid criticism that Hannity should have disclosed his relationship with Cohen, if only when he was interviewing Cohen or talking about Cohen, talking about the raid on Cohen. Anyway, the network was unaware of Sean Hannity's informal relationship with Cohen, was surprised by the announcement. We have reviewed the matter and spoken to Sean, and he continues to have our full support. Advertisers are bailing, though, and that's the only thing that gets a message through to Fox News management. One more piece at The Intercept today that impressed me. Johnny Dwyer, whose byline I've never seen before, notes that the hearing that Michael Cohen was forced to reveal Sean Hannity's name at on Monday was really based on the violation of the attorney-client privilege in the case of defense attorney Lynn Stewart. If you recall, back in the 90s, she was representing the blind sheikh who was accused and convicted of conspiring some terrorist attacks in New York City after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And Stewart passed messages to the public from her client. That led to raids on her office and other facilities where they did brutally breach the attorney-client privilege, and she ended up getting 10 years in federal prison that was shortened only by her life-threatening illness that led to a compassionate furlough before she died. But it's an important piece that shows the history of the attorney-client privilege and the way that its enforcement varies given the political climate. Interesting piece in the Washington Post today arguing that fundraising analysis shows that the philosophy, the political views of the Democratic candidates running for Congress this year are more left than they have been since 2006. And you can quibble with the methodology here. I do. But I think it's an interesting snapshot. They don't bother to mention about all the military veterans and former intelligence professionals who are running as Democrats this year. But it's an interesting snapshot. Puerto Rico is in the dark again, second time within a week. A major failure has knocked out all of the power grid, and it may take as much as another 36 hours to restore. Ending today with two interesting stories about aviation. The other day, in Iceland, the suspected mastermind behind the theft of 600 computers used to mine Bitcoin escaped from a minimum security prison and hopped on a flight from, I think, Reykjavik to, actually, it was a rural airport in Keflavik. No, let me get this right. He left a prison in rural southern Iceland, boarded a flight at the international airport in Keflavik, so I guess that's near near the capital. Anyway, he got on a plane, and he was arrested when he arrived in Stockholm. But what was interesting is that the Prime Minister of Iceland was also on that flight. She doesn't have her own Air Force One. Her name is Katrín Jakobsdóttir. She was on her way to a meeting in Stockholm with the Prime Minister of India. She was unharmed, and the suspect was arrested. And finally, move over Sully. I can't remember Sullenberger's first name, but Sully is the famous pilot who landed a U.S. airplane on the Hudson River after birds caused both of his jet engines to fail after takeoff. Well, we have a new heroine. Her name is Tammy Jo Schultz, a former Navy fighter pilot who was at the helm of Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, took off from LaGuardia in New York, headed for Dallas, but an engine blew up shortly after takeoff. It blew out a window. The passenger sitting there was partially sucked out and ultimately died from injuries sustained there. But the description here is just chilling. Tammy Jo Schultz was at the controls. The blast hurled debris into the side of the plane. A passenger window shattered. The cabin depressurized. A woman was partly sucked outside the plane. Passengers panicked. Flight attendants sprang into action. In the cockpit, Captain Schultz remained calm. She radioed, Southwest 1380 has an engine fire. Descending. It's described as not a hint of alarm in her voice. Then she maneuvered the plane for 40 minutes, flying on a single engine. As passengers sent goodbye messages to loved ones, tightened their oxygen masks, and braced for impact. She radioed to the tower in Philly, "Can you have the medical meet us there on the runway? They said there's a hole and someone went out." Well, she did land it successfully at 11:20 a.m., despite the loss of one soul, as they say, in an airline incident. All the rest of the passengers escaped safely from the flight. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. We put it up on YouTube. When you visit there, click on the subscribe thing. No money involved.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.